in throwing, but Derek has a pretty amazing story. Grew up in a small town in Canada, not far, or my mom's from Western Canada too, Vancouver. So, but to let him introduce himself, if you guys don't know about him, you should. And hold on.
I came from Western Canada, a town of about 200 people, and I earned a scholarship to the United States, which we're in now. And I went to North Idaho College for 2 years. So I did the JUCO route because I didn't have an SAT. Did my 2 years, bumped up to Wyoming on a scholarship. At which point, one of the guys from Bird's Slide, Dr. Larry Judge, had left South Carolina to come up and coach as a head coach for the first time in his athletic career. And he became my coach as well. So Bert and I actually shared the same stories of Larry Judge's progression into volumization of programming, how to take athletes in that sort of 2 to 4 year range, that limited NCAA window, and super compensate their training to the point where it's going to be make or break. You're going to be very good or you're going to be very broken when you're done. I was both. I don't deny that at all. I was ranked #1 in the world, and I was ranked #1 in the hospital in the same year. So the system does work, but it's true. Bert and I were rivals. When your coach goes and coaches somewhere else, doesn't matter what school that is, you become target #1 come NCAAs, right? Because it's going to be, well, if you're going to leave us and coach these clowns, we're going to whoop their ass every chance we get, and in return, we're like, well, we can't let that happen. So that was my collegiate career. I got hurt very bad in college, but I had a lot of success. From there, I transitioned into the NCAA system as a coach at Eastern Michigan. At Eastern Michigan, I was now rehabbing myself from a mid-patellar rupture, which we share. I think we're the only 2 people on the planet that shared that injury and came back from it that I know of. In that year is when I was introduced, in a sense, to the next level strength and conditioning, or what you think of as next level strength and conditioning in terms of long-term periodization. I started working with a guy by the name of Judd Logan, who was a 4-time Olympian for the United States in the hammer throw. He was my brother's coach at Ashland University, where he still resides. And in that period of time, I was introduced to what I now understand to be just systematic approach to programming for Olympic athletes. So I was coaching in Eastern Michigan, training myself, rehabbing my knee, and I was just working Judd over for information. At which point I decided I was going to take another kick at the can. Came back from my coaching career, put that on hold, and the whopping $12,000 they paid me that year, and went and trained with Judd for 3 more seasons. In that time, I reestablished a #1 ranking in the world indoors in the weight throw, which is an obscure event, but it is what it is. It was a passion I had. I represented Canada in the hammer throw and set the Canadian national record at the time, which has now been disintegrated by Jim Stacey, but it was around 243 feet. But what was really essential about working with Judd Logan in that period of time was establishing an understanding and fundamentals of what long-term periodization was. Larry Judge taught me how to over-volumize and cut that time, but he didn't always have a system that was going to keep you healthy. So I always tell people very honestly, I squatted 700 raw twice in my life. One time it destroyed me, one time it didn't. The time that didn't was under Judd, and I was able to take that information and transcend it, which then led me, in the Reader's Digest version, to eventually coaching in the NFL with some of John's good friends like Ted Washington. I coached the Cleveland Browns as a 3rd assistant in 07-08 under Tom Zielinski. And then I had a really unique opportunity to lecture around the world for a business in Rhode Island. So I became a professional speaker for the Poliquin Group. And for 3 years, I traveled about 240 days a year and lectured on human performance, rehab, prehab, as well as what they were specialized in was supplement sales. From there, I transitioned out of that work because it was quite arduous in its lifestyle. And I was actually picked up, and I won't get into that, but I was picked up to work with a private athlete in Saudi Arabia, which I've done for the last 4 years. A princess that wanted to be an athlete because she simply didn't have the opportunity to pursue that lifestyle due to the constraints of the life that they live, both politically, socially, and quite simply safety. She couldn't be publicly out in the open, but she wanted to see what she could do. So, with her, we just completed, I think I just completed my 1200 workout with her, and that's a girl that's gone from learning how to lift weights, literally the 8-pound bicep curl girl to, raw back squatting 225 pounds, cleaning 75 kilos, and trap bar deadlifting 395. And she now has a Sornix base camp in her house or in her palace in Saudi Arabia. So I've definitely,
As she should. As she should. What else would you have?
Yeah.
Is it solid gold with Falcon on it?
That was my recommendation, but she went with flat silver.
That's a good choice. That's my favorite. That's mine too.
Yeah, so that's the Reader's Digest version. Obviously, I can take 17 hours to tell a 17-second story, but that's more my gift than yours. So,
Wow.
Yeah.
You know what? Just like everybody we've had on here, the idea of fueling performance and really just going through the journey of it. I mean, can you talk about what it took in terms of? I mean, I don't. You guys haven't heard the story, but actually coming out of Western Canada and almost bullshitting your way into
100%. Bullshitted my way right into the
He gets up and tells the story. He's like, I just really lied.
Yeah.
And lied his way into it. And I was like, you know what? I appreciate that for a big thing. Like I say, most of life is just pretending like you know where you're supposed to be. Like if you look like you're out of place, somebody's going to come find you. If you pretend like you know where you're going, it really helps.
Yeah, and it's funny how that works. So what ended up happening pre-internet era, I graduated high school in '95, and I was like, when Bert put up his marks on the board for his high school performances and really said how bad they were. Yeah, he had me on one. Like he was better in one event than I was coming out of high school. So I was really underdeveloped. Now the thing that I always talk about is the fact that I also was really naive, so I didn't know what I had. I didn't realize that although I grew up in a town of 200 people, it really in the heart of the Rocky Mountains, the one thing I didn't understand at the time, and I've told this story before, I told it on the podcast, is the first time I ever did a measured back squat was actually in a contest basically at a farm show. A local gym had set up a barbell, you could pay a couple bucks and you could do your best efforts. And there were some older guys that lifted weights in my town, but nothing to write home about. The very first time, I was 16 years old, that I ever did a back squat in my life was 420 pounds. So I'd never squatted under 400 pounds in my life. That's just reality. And I never used to tell that story because I always thought,
fuck you.
Yeah.
And then that was what I was waiting on. I told on the podcast, and I'm like, no way. And I'm going with it.
It is. It's one of those unfortunate realities, and it took me a long time to come to terms with it because I didn't realize it. I didn't realize I had the fundamental building blocks, and the thing that a lot of people didn't realize is because I was so naive about it, when I had the opportunity to go to the US, how I found that school is I took out a book from the library, called a number on the page, and I told them that I was X number of abilities up in Canada, and these guys gave me a scholarship to a JUCO, sight unseen. So when I went down to the US, I knew I'd lied to them about my ability to perform in an event to get a scholarship. Yeah.
Did you tell them about the 420 back squat?
No, because I didn't think it was a big deal.
Oh.
Right? So
I would have led with that. I don't know about you.
Yeah.
I'd be like squatting 420 at 16 without lifting weights.
Well, me and my brother got kicked out of a weightlifting store one time in Spokane, Washington, because they had the barbell set up on the floor, and it was set up like a Christmas tree. You could buy the whole thing, weighed about 365 pounds. And I remember my brother and I were like, hey, look at that barbell on the floor, like a show floor. And my brother went over at like 16 at that time and deadlifts, never having done a deadlift in his life. And we get tossed out, right, because we're lifting their displays. But it's, when I think back on those things, it was the pursuit of that type of mentality. It was just like, when I was given that scholarship to the US, I knew I'd bullshitted them. And I knew that I was in a situation, but the one thing that they didn't also know about me, having grown up in the wilderness of British Columbia, is I always felt like I was the guy that had to super overachieve, and I was the guy that had to really always put in the extra 10%. So we had a coach. He played for the Denver Broncos when they were an expansion team. And he didn't coach us all the time. We had another guy that eventually became the US Olympic coach. But this guy was a presence to us, and he was a presence to me. And he would come in, and he would always like stare into your soul with these piercing blue eyes. And he said, when I was a track and field athlete in university, he goes, the best guys on the team always carried the broom. That's what he'd say, right? Shit like this, right? He's old school. And I'd be like, Coach, why'd they carry the broom? because it showed responsibility and that they were going to be responsible for the ring and responsible for their teammates doing well. So I'd be like, yeah, carry the broom.
I'm gonna get a broom.
I'm gonna get a broom, right? So then I started carrying the broom, and I would come in first, and I would stay late, and I would sweep the ring, and do all this ridiculous shit that people always think about pawning off onto the red shirts and doing all that other stuff. So I was not only leading the team in performance, but I was also taking on the responsibilities of being the team leader because of these mentor type positions that were in my life that I listened to. But it was all quite fear driven because I didn't want to get found out. And so I came into that freshman year throwing 145 feet roughly in the hammer with a 16-pound hammer. At the end of that year, I threw 189.9. I was their first ever national champion. And I was their first national champion because I had the horsepower, but I needed guidance. And I never told anyone that I lied to get into university until I was inducted into their Hall of Fame. And that was my speech.
They like recently.
You're taking that back. Yeah.
And so you get in, you obviously bullshit your way into junior college. Then you get, then once you'd established yourself in junior college, then you went on to
University of Wyoming. Yeah.
And then it sounds like a pretty epic deal where it's like, 10 of us are going out, 5 of us are coming back with us 5 are going to be champions.
Yeah, and probably, in 2000 we sent 4 of that team to the Olympics from the collegiate team, which was quite unheard of in one sporting group, the field events. Right away I had success, but I didn't know how to manage that success because I went in throwing 61 feet in the weight throw. For those that throw the weight throw, it's a 35-pound weight you throw indoors. 61 is okay, it's nothing to write home about. So I go in throwing 61 feet, and by indoor nationals, I've thrown 74-10, moved to the 10th furthest throw in the history of the sport, and I was ranked #1 in the world with my teammate, and then eventually Lance Steele, who's the world record holder, passes by as soon as he opened for the season. So I'd gone from obscurity, lied to get into college, ranked #1 in the world, going into NCAA's hot, thinking I'm going to go in and just tear up Division I on my first go-around. And I watched the finals from the stands because I couldn't deal with the pressure of that next level. I didn't know how to regulate myself. I was one of these guys that was a super high energy, like, I'm going to tap in and it's going to fucking be a magical thing, or I'm going to burn up in the ring and everybody's just going to throw dirt on me and cast me to the side. So in that point in my life,
So you're basically the Highlander.
I was the highlight, right? So I was really a hot-headed, emotionally driven athlete with not a lot of mechanisms in place to be able to balance out what it was to be at that level. So I ended up blown up, redshirted outdoors. I didn't get to get the All-American, yada, yada, yada. So I came back that next year, and that next year I'd done everything in the summer I could to be an immovable force in the NCAAs, which led to a mid-patellar rupture, a hip cast, and learning how to walk again, and completely writing off the 2000 season.
How'd you rupture mid-patella?
So, 12 weeks to the day of the rupture of the patella, I had actually had a Jones fracture in my left foot, got a metal plate. So if you look at how that played out, I was always just, I got here on a lie, train. So
Did you have any tendonitis or anything in the knee?
Of course. Of course, and but it was just a sore knee. It was, So the way that it broke down for me is 12 weeks to the day on a Tuesday of that blown out patella tendon. I had broke the foot. 2 days before I broke that foot, at 240 pounds, I squatted 600 for 6. So I was putting a lot of force into my body, and I still was able to maintain a standing vertical jump of positive 40 inches at that time. So I had all these gears that were in play. I break my foot throwing the discus, I have to have a metal plate put in. So I'm inactive for 6, wearing a boot, yada yada. 4 weeks after that, I start doing a little bit of training, and on the Sunday in front of that blown out knee, after having been out for 12 weeks on a broken foot, I go to Kansas, retake the #1 spot in the NCAAs. First meet back after 12 weeks out, #1 in the country, I'm going to salvage this year. After that meet, we come back to Wyoming, and I squat 500 for 5, right? So having 12 weeks off, I lost 100 pounds and 1 rep off my squat. So I definitely gotten weaker, but I was okay. I go out, and my teammate, who was actually one of Bert's teammates in South Carolina, previous 13-time All-American, really good athlete, we're doing box jumps. So because we're in a system where no one was up-regulating and down-regulating training volumes for in and outcoming athletes that were injured, which we would do in today's world, hopefully, they just moved me right back into full volume January training, even though I've been out for 12 weeks. So they turn around and they're like, okay, 36-inch box jumps, jump up, jump down, jump up, jump down. My teammates are like, hey, you're the springy guy. Do you think you can jump over those boxes? I made it over. Yes, of course, right? So I made it over the first 4 with flawless technique. On the 5th, the knee exploded, and the 5th box I went through with my forearm. And that was it. That was game over. And so I was out for a year. 13 months later, in my senior year, I started doing some weight turns. 13 months later, started doing some weight turns. To this day, it's a mystery. I pulled off an All-American that year as a senior indoors, but I still couldn't run, I couldn't jump, and I could only do squat holds with 135 pounds. But somehow I managed an All-American.
Did you lie to him?
That's it.
You're like, hey, I should be an All-American.
I should be an All-American. Yeah, let's slide this in. No one needs to know. I'll tell you the story later.
No, I mean, it's really the only other guy I've ever met that's actually had the mid-patella rupture and the sickness of looking down and seeing your kneecap sitting 3 inches to the right.
And high, it's like, a weird thing.
You had kneecaps in the wrong place.
Yeah.
And then coming back from it. And I mean, it took me, I got hurt on opening day and I was the starter the next opening day. But I remember thinking, like, there's no way I'm going to get back on
And that's a full year with the benefits of good trainers, hopefully good modalities in your situation. You know, I'm in Podunville, Laramie. I had a great surgeon. Don't get me wrong, my surgeon was phenomenal. Dr. Kiefer he was a radical guy. And I say that using the term correctly. He was long-haired, big handlebar mustache, swore a lot, and referred to my knee injury as a bad hair day. That's it. That's how he described it.
I called my guy Pete the Butcher.
Pete the Butcher.
That's what I called my surgeon. He wasn't real fond of me.
No, Dr. Kiefer, he came in and it was one of those surreal moments because it was the broken foot was something I always knew I was going to come back from. I didn't even hesitate. I broke the right foot 2 years previous, had surgery on that one. So I was like, it's just broken toes, it's broken feet, it's no big deal. But the knee I knew I was pretty fucked up. Like there's something that clicks in the brain. Like when I almost lost my foot a couple of years ago, there's something that clicks in the brain. Yeah, I just slid that in there. Yeah, we'll get that.
So the second time I almost lost my foot.
The second time I almost lost my foot. There's something clicks in the brain where you realize that you're significantly set back in life. So like how we say, it's like I'm extremely fortunate. There's a lot more worse off people that have gone through a lot more than I do. But I do know what it's like to lose human ability in physical function and then get it back. So you start to value it heavily. So when you lose the ability to walk or you have severe nerve damage or something becomes very damaged, there is a moment, it's dead for a long time, and then there's a moment where it turns back on and it's a very relieving moment. But I remember Dr. Kiefer came in and I'm hip casted, I'm a mess. In my brain, I know I've had the worst thing that could ever happen to me at that time in my life happen. And he comes in, he just put his hand on my leg and he's like, I'm really sorry to tell you, it's a career-ending injury. And he could see like my eyes must have been like saucers. And he sort of steps back and realizes, he's like, wow, I just delivered the worst news with the least amount of motion possible. And then he sort of taps my leg and he's like, the exact words, fuck it, it's just a bad hair day. That was it. And so I ended up writing a story about it years later about the fact that I had to grasp anything that I could at that moment to give me some sort of hope. Because I knew the road was going to be shit for a while. I knew I was just getting on the start of a journey that was going to be very hard. And I heard him say, it's just a bad hair day. And to this day, that is the only part of what he said that I actually had emotional attachment to.
Yeah, they told me the exact same thing. The doctor walked in and showed me the x-ray and said, nobody ever came back from this injury, this is the end of your career. And my mom and dad were there, and my mom, as you guys know, was like this, and I look over and I just see a tear stream down my dad's face, and I'd never seen my dad cry. And I looked and I was like, I'm fucked. This is the end of my career. And I was first start in the NFL, and it ended, I got to the party and didn't even get out there and have a good time. And I remember thinking, laying there and being like, this will not be my defining moment. I will not go gentle that good night.
Yeah.
And I remember rehabbing and hysterically, how am I going to fix this? And I knew that I had to take the personal accountability, that I didn't have to wait on the doctor. There was no PT. There was nobody that could do it for me. I had to like pick myself up and somehow do it. And I'm like, you know what, my goal is to walk out of here without a limp. And I was like, you know, fuck you, NFL. I'm out of here.
Yeah.
And then I was a starter. And then I was like, okay, you're better. Let's go, NFL. We're friends.
Yeah, exactly.
I was like, ooh, I like this. But like that piece of, and what's so shitty, like I always think like as a doctor, can you imagine walking in and telling these athletes or whoever it is, like there's nothing we can do, this is the end of your life or the end of your sporting life. And they're like, okay, this is the end, nobody ever came back from it, see you later.
Yeah.
And you're like, instead of being like, you know, we'll find it like you just want to snatch those guys. And when I heard his story, I was like, that was my story. They did that to like how dare you saddle me with that shit?
Right.
And you know, and then you look at it, you know, people that persevered and like didn't just take it like, you know, at that face value.
And there's something to be said about the process too. And I know that people have heard me speak a lot. I'm a big process guy. I'm a process guy in life. I'm a process guy in everything. To a fault. I mean, I'll talk your ears off about shit that probably doesn't matter. But when I look back with the process of rehabilitation, and when I look back at what I went through, so for me, and I've talked to these guys about it a little bit, I'm a big guy that has always used programmed fantasy for the sake of advancement of life. So
Ooh,
you could probably coin that, because that just
let's
rolled.
get into this.
Yeah, that just rolled. So I was a big believer very, very young, because I grew up in a town of 200 people, that if you wanted to get to a place in life that you have never gotten to, the reality is if you know no one that has ever done it, and you can't consult or mentor anybody that's been there, then by default, what you're trying to achieve is 100% a fantasy. There's no tangible aspect of it that you can grasp and be like, I put this into play, and this is a part of a puzzle that's supposed to be a part of a machine. So for me, when I was leaving that town of 200 people, in my mind, I programmed a very conceptual fantasy that was envisionment of me always doing something grander. I was always chasing something bigger. I still had no idea. I didn't know it was going to be track and field. I didn't know I was going to be working for princesses. I didn't know I was going to be treating Kendall Jenner's shoulder in Megève, France on a random Sunday. Like, none of those things were tangible at that time in my life, but the one thing that was tangible was my ability to control the destiny of my thoughts. We all talk about the destiny of life and how we're trying to control the patterns that we do and the patterns that we are to be successful. But the patterns of your thought and the destiny of a thought is the easiest thing to tangibly or intangibly manipulate at first. So you start to envision yourself as greater than you are. People are like, oh, you can't do that. That's ego, that's self. And fuck you, it's inside your head. If you don't see yourself as great, you're never going to be great in the physical manifestation of that life. So for me, I always, and I didn't go around going, I'm going to be a great big guy or super successful, but in my head, that picture show was always reeling of success. And I talked at Summer Strong, I talked about being on The Tonight Show with Jay Leno in my mind, because I knew that that would manifest to something outside of my town. I couldn't be on Jay Leno on a talk show as a guest if I'm just a podunk kid. So I always manifested, and I kept that manifestation going. And even when I was injured, all the injury became was a new fantasy destiny manifestation in my mind, where I'm like, I'm going to be the guy that overcomes this career-ending injury, and I will be the story that I tell someday to other people. And if I'm lucky, somebody that's going through the worst fucking experience of their life will hear my story one time, and it'll give them one more day of progress forward. And so I started to manifest. I'm going to overcome this. I'm going to achieve this. I'm going to be the story that'll be like, holy fuck, this guy was the guy that was completely blown out. He couldn't walk, and now he's a national champion and national record holder of a 27-year-old record. All these manifestations every day. And then my physical manifestation of that into the world was always be polite to your doctor. Always be polite to your therapist that you're going to spend 4 hours a day with. If you pass out in therapy or if you vomit on the table, you never hold it against your PT. Because those days can come when you're hurt that bad. Your PT's working on you and you just pass out because your body's like, fuck it, I'm done with this. And so I would pass out, or I'd get white, or I'd get green, but I would never complain. And no matter how much I hated it, I would always come back the next day and just be like, okay, what are we doing today? And because in my mind, the fantasy was overriding fear. And I continuously overrode until, lo and behold, in 2005, I'm standing there and the hammer lands in a field in Brea, Ohio, and I break a 27-year-old Canadian national record, and I start crying, but I'm not emotional, and I can't figure out, you go back so fast. I couldn't figure out why I was emotional, and I can't figure it out why I am now. But
it's the release.
It's
it's the amount of work, it's the body of work, and like all the things that people didn't say, and it's like this deal where you, for me it was running onto the field for that opening day, and like running out there as fast as I could, and wanting to get to that first play so I could get past it. And as soon as I got past that, like the point that I got hurt, I was like, you know, I felt like Cole Trickle driving through the
smoke, and
through the smoke, and he's like, I'm through it, Harry, let's go. And he's like, and he takes off and wins the race. Like, to me, that was like the passion. That was like, I gotta get through the smoke.
And that's exactly it. So when I think of like that manifestation, so in 2000 I can't walk, in 2005 I'm the best my country's ever produced. What people don't realize is the 2005 Canadian national record didn't represent me kicking a bunch of people's ass. There's a part in an athlete's mind, or somebody that becomes extremely driven by that fantasy, that there is almost like there was a giant, like Big Ben in London clicks to 12 o'clock, and in some part of your mind, it feels like your life now started again. Because that 2000 to 2005, no matter how much good shit happened, there was a part of your psyche that had not gone forward 1 second from the moment you woke up and they told you your career was over. And the moment that that clock clicks to that 1 second, and the world tells you in a tangible way that you overcame something and you now are back on track with life, there's a part of you that doesn't know how to deal with that. The problem is that also shows up the day you retire for life, in terms of an athletic world, because that clock will stop on that fucking second the moment you decide that you're done with professional athletics, and if you're not careful, it will not click to the next second, which starts the next phase of your life. And a lot of people get stuck in those moments where that clock stops on a tragedy, it stops on a physical setback, it stops on a career change, it stops on a divorce. Whatever those things are in life, that clock will stop. And you don't realize how heavy the weight of that time was until something changes and that clock clicks forward again. And people are like just massive releases 10 years later, and they don't know why or how heavy it was. Well, it's heavy because a part of you as a human existence on this planet literally stopped living until that clock could click forward again and tell you that it's okay. You're okay. You can continue with your life. Something like that.
It's fucking cool. Yeah, that's good. Dude, the fact that you grew up in a town of 200, and like I always think, like if you hadn't had, if you'd grown up, let's say in Vancouver, or, you grew up in something where you didn't have to create that, do you think that almost the mechanism that you created, this kind of like a successful fantasy, might not? Because for me, I mean, my brothers played football.
Yep.
I didn't know anybody played in the NFL. I just knew that, like, my brothers told me you gotta be cool to play football, so that's why I wanted to go do it. I just wonder if, like, if you're in a situation where it's more real, like you grow up in, I don't know where Hammertown is now, or like, in like a,
Lethbridge, oddly enough.
Oh, is it Lethbridge?
Yeah, oddly enough, yeah.
My mom's from Lethbridge.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But like, if you lived in a place where like this was the culture, do you think that you wouldn't need, or you wouldn't have needed to create that? You think that that's almost like a defense mechanism, a way to stop you?
Yes, because I've thought about that. You always run the scenario in your mind of the would have, could have. If I had grown up in, in Rhode Island in the United States, in Hammer Central, would have I been an Olympian instead of a guy that got hurt? Would have I got to those end goals faster? Would have things like that happened? Now, we can look at it from the sense that whatever was programmed into my brain at a young age and into my central nervous system, that's always been there. So if someone could untap that potential, most certainly the ability would have existed. However, I do believe that the manifestation of fantasy that some people can tap into very easily and some people struggle to because of the inhibitions of their own insecurities inside their mind. People tell you it's crazy, you can't think about fantasy. Fantasy's bullshit. Fantasy's for.
Is it really fantasy or is it dreams? Like I mean, they always said, dream big. Like the idea, like.
I think it's interchangeable.
Yeah.
I've always believed that the dreams
It's
of
not fantasy like involved like a cloak. And
yeah, exactly,
maybe
right?
some,
Like some Dungeons
some
and
Dungeons
Dragons.
and Dragons.
Yeah, I think.
Like Bert played in high school and he doesn't tell anybody.
Yeah, exactly. He's the Grand Wizard. It's manifesting now at 40. So.
Actually, it was a 13th level. I had a 9-sided dice.
Yes, exactly. It's the dice can't even stay on one side. It's got so many. If you guys haven't played Dungeons and Dragons, sucks to you. But anyway, the greatest game of the '90s ever. But anyway, it's totally fantasy. It's like I'm a level 17 dragon cast on you, and the other person's like, oh, they have to totally fuck. I don't know where I'm going. Anyway, so
that's why we call it the long road.
The long road. But I think with that dream and the manifestation aspect, or the manifestation of dream to goal to tangible to result, when I think about those things, I always do think of them in terms of, even if you wanted to use less confronting words for some people, because some people don't like to really get into the ether of thought. They need harsh, solid thoughts. When you think of intangible, something that doesn't really exist, it's a thought or a process. When you make that transfer from intangible to tangible realities, especially in the sporting world, I think that intangible has a tendency to get beat up very quickly by society. And I think that if you allow for a lot of external noises to come into that process, it can take your process and start to redirect it, and maybe you're going to miss that sneakingly tiny gap of opportunity that the fantasy part of your brain or the dream or intangible part of the brain was able to get you through, because someone else just steers you enough, just a bit too late or too soon, and you miss that gap spot. And I think that for a lot of people, and this is going to sound crazy, and I'm not saying it from the sense of you need to become antisocial, nothing like that. But I'm friends with a guy by the name of Ben Pekulski, who's a former professional bodybuilder, and when we were talking about this on his podcast recently, we both talked about it. There is a part to success, regardless of what that success is in this world, where an antisocial, and I'm not saying antisocial in like close the windows and hide in your basement antisocial, but there has to be an antisocial part to the process wherein which you limit external influence so that the magnificence of your own existence can super exceed the noise to a degree in which you can actually achieve your goal. Because too many people are trying to impose their goals into your existence, or even inside your
limitations,
or limitations into your psyche. And the thing is you don't know what your limitations are. You don't know, and a lot of times, if you allow too much external influence into your own belief system, you will hit limitation that is not actually yours, but the limitations of those imposed on you by those in your closest or extended circles. Social media is fucking limiting the shit out of people because they spend too much time comparing, and sometimes you have to disconnect from that and be like, what is this, what am I, and what am I capable of? And then you have to put it out on the line and get that. You got to get your teeth kicked in, and you got to kick some teeth in this life. And the reality is in doing so, you will establish what your ability is, and your intangibles will very much become tangible in that process. And it'll be a very measurable thing. And what you'll find is you'll super exceed in some areas, and you'll realize that you need to really work in others. But if you're always being influenced externally, you're going to get false props and false negatives all the time, and that can really disrupt the development.
Do you think there's a factor that with your sport selection that you chose a very solemn, kind of singular type deal, even though you guys, track team and I played on a team and they're here, at the end of the day, it's you standing out there and your ability as an individual to perform. And it's almost like too much external noise to be able to pull it in. I sometimes wonder, in like a team environment, like playing football, where now you have all these different personalities around in this, and you're just trying to like execute what I need to do.
Right.
Which I'll tell you this, I liked 100%. Like the thought of like, being out there and being able to go do it without, somebody to kind of help you a little bit.
For sure, it definitely, even when you're competing at the highest level, and say there's multiple guys from Team Canada, and we were on a field in Australia in 2006, and I remember. I knew, for example, in 2006 in Melbourne that I was retiring that year. Like, I knew I was done. Here's how I knew. I'd spent my whole life getting ready for the world stage. We were competing in a stadium. Melbourne's old cricket grounds holds about 92,000 people. It's an old Olympic stadium. When the crowd cheered, the old cement building would shake and the ground would reverberate. You could actually feel the earth move as the crowd would chant for this Australian runner. We come up out of the tunnel, and as we're coming up out of the tunnel onto the field, we're being led by an Australian hammer thrower who would eventually win the meet. He was one of the top guys in the world at the time. And when they saw him come out of the tunnel, and we were right behind him, it was like coming onto a gladiator's field in the sense that, you know, all these people are right on top of you. And they were charging and charging. They're just, that's our guy, he's going to win, everybody's going crazy. And you're just, the group think is intense. And I remember looking up, and I looked around, and I'm like, this is it. I'm good. I'm done. And I remember Jim, who went on to play second at that meet, he's like, man, are you excited? And I'm like, yeah. And I had nothing, right? Because in my mind, I'm like, my fantasy's over. I'd used it up. I had gotten to where my extension of my intangibles were available to get me, was to the world stage of athletics, to have that moment, win or lose, etc. And I remember after the thought thinking, that might be one of those circumstances where the benefit of team think, group think, people that got your right, your left, your back, your front, and you are a part of something bigger, that's where I think in that world you do get the continuation of manifestation because it becomes bigger than you. So at that moment, the biggest I could be is what I had perceived for myself up to that moment. But I always thought that if I had have continued in team sports after high school, that a part of me, the ego in a sense, gets sacrificed for what can I contribute to the greater good of these other men, or other women in your cases as athletes. And I always thought, I think that's what allows team sports sometimes to continue much longer in duration for some than that individual endeavor.
So you grow up, you know, Western Canada in the Rockies in a small town, 200 people. Like, talk to me a little bit about that. Like, I have you know, we talk about the elements for athletic success, and what we found when we look back at all like the best athletes, there were three components: genetics, geography, and opportunity.
Yeah.
Are really the three components. Like, you know, the opportunity. The opportunity. You know, you went out to seize the opportunity. You know, the genetics. I mean, obviously the geography. But I was kind of thinking, like, you know, from a genetic pool, like a 16-year-old kid who's never lifted weights going squats 420, I still want to say fuck off. Like that to me, like, you know, what are the genetics? You're like, oh, my dad was a logger or something.
Yeah.
Like.
Yeah, so, and that is an interesting thing. So, you know, I was all immigrant heritage. Oddly enough, my family has been in the United States since the 1600s, and it was only my great-grandfather that left West Virginia to come up to Fernie, British Columbia to chase mining. So that was the addition of one side of my family into Canada. The other side...
Oh, in Fernie?
In Fernie, yeah, little tiny mining town. So it was miners for as far back as my life goes on one side. The other side was German, Swedish immigrants. But they were hardy people. So my father, who's now 70 years old, he did a little bit of track in high school. We didn't have organized sports where we were. But when I started lifting weights, and my dad was a big man, like my grandfather, when he died in his late 70s, was still a 235-pound man. And I remember hearing a story when I was an adult. I never really met my grandfather on that side. My dad would talk about him. He's like, yeah, your grandfather had a disc replacements in the 60s and in his like L4, L5, which was really crazy to think about. But what had happened was a pallet had fallen over at the mill onto one of his best friends and it pinned him from the knees down. And the pallet weighed 1,200 pounds. And my grandfather deadlifted it so they could drag the guy out from underneath. So there was a level of physicality within that family structure that was never really developed. And my dad never really lifted weights, but he was still a natural 6'1", 235, right? So as soon as I introduced, when I think of like training, it's like we all have a certain octane that we run on. And the question is when we introduce that training stimulus, how hot does it burn? and what are we capable of producing. So I had a certain level of gas in my body that was untapped, and as soon as I added the flame to it, which was the intensity of training, I immediately developed. So by the time I was 16 years old, I was 189, 190 pounds, right? Like I was developing very, very quickly, and I could still jump 40 inches and eventually 42 inches at 240 pounds. So I had this certain neurological fuse that had been lit, and all I needed was opportunity and guidance, because the raw materials for something were very much present.
And then what, like, how did you get into the idea of something like track or throwing a hammer? I mean, I would think, you know, rodeo or some of the other stuff that was out there.
Anything else, right?
Yeah,
First sport I competed in was snow skiing. I played volleyball more than I did any other sport in high school. What it was for me is organized physical education in high school. We had a school teacher, and he's just like, hey, we're going to learn discus today. And we threw it from the home plate at the baseball fields, and it went significantly further than anybody else could throw a discus. So I went to the equivalent to a state track meet. I won that, and the rest was history. Like I could pick stuff up and I could make it go away.
So you basically found no, but it's really just finding aptitude, like going out there and saying, hey, you know what, like I'm going to allow not only for things to pre-select, but I'm going to pre-select them. Like this is something I'm good at, and ironically, most people are really like the things they're good at. It's very 100%. Few people that are like, hey, I don't know about throwing this discus, I'm good at it, I like it now.
Yeah.
Which,
I remember the first time I picked up a softball, I was 15 years old, and I threw it 315 feet over the left wall of the baseball field. Right.
Let's throw stuff, make it go away.
Just make it go away. It's like, and what I realized early on, and this is something I try to instill into athletes, and it goes back to the intangible dream or fantasy state of the brain, because it's also the same part of the brain that allows you to flip the switch of intensity when you have to turn it on for performance. If you don't have a well-established, and we can call it neurological system, we can get into the physiology of the CNS, we can have that conversation, but let's keep it simple. If you can't get into your head and flip that switch from light to dark, and that's, for me, it's always been that way. Everyone's like, instill your performance through the passion of love and positivity. Fuck you. You want to see, you know, it's like, I was a lunatic when I competed. I used to go to a place so dark, and I didn't hate anybody, but it was just rage and anger, and I would pull the universe into my body and just be like, I'm gonna fucking destroy, and then I would. And I would harness it, and I would put it right into that one thing for that 1 second or that 2 seconds. It didn't matter if it was a vertical jump, a back squat, a clean, a sprint, a throw. And when it was done, that euphoric release brought me huge amounts of joy and happiness, and I could go back to being a stable human. But for that moment, I could go to that place, and everybody was excited about it after a while. They're like, he's going to it, right? And you just start drumming it up in your head. And it's not going to be harmful to anyone. It's going to be harmful to that barbell or to that performance or discus, or in your sport, perhaps to the play at hand, one play at
the individual.
The individual. But it's still the same harnessing of that emotion or that fantasy, and then you release it and you reset. And in your world, they were doing it back to you. So it was a perfect balance, right?
So you know. The one interesting thing too is you actually went and coached, and he was a strength coach in the NFL. How was, you know, as a strength coach looking in and working with the football players and that kind of realm coming from what you did? Like, what was the difference? I mean, it's
hugely different. And in fact, I'm very honest when I say the NFL really left a bit of a sad flavor in my mouth, because we talked about this briefly with Joe and Drusy, right? So when I got into the NFL, I'm as green can be. Like, I don't know anything about anything. I know human performance, and I know how humans move. I don't know football. Doesn't matter, because I know that if I can make these guys better, they will take care of football, right? That's how I looked at it. So first thing they did is put me with this offensive lineman that had been injured really bad the year previous. So with me in my mind, I'm like, okay, I've been through this. I can do this. So we start working together, and I get him all the way up to healthy, right? You know where this is going. So I get him all the way to healthy, I get him trained, he's getting highly motivated, I'm getting more motivated, we're super excited. the moment that we start running on the field in our training, and the moment we do full workouts in the weight room, the very next day, they call me into the office and they're like, hey, how's Joe doing? I'm like, he's doing amazing. And I just blow up a spot. I'm like, he's ready. And they're like, okay, cool. 10 minutes later, the entire medical staff comes into the strength staff. They tell me what they want me to sign and tell me what to look at. And I'm like, cool, we're getting him back on the field. And I'm like, this is awesome. The next day he was cut.
Yeah.
He was gone. Right?
So what they do is in the NFL, if you're injured, they wait till you get healthy, and then they say to the strength coach, hey, take him out, let's run a little bit. And there's a little dude up there with a camera who videos it, and they're like, see, look, he's running, he's healthy. Now we get to cut him. And then they cut him. And so what they were doing is asking him, like, how is he? He's healthy? Good. We got him on tape, get rid of his ass.
Yep. So I was the naive green guy that really felt like I had led someone to slaughter. And at that
You did, you heartless.
I fucking let right into it. And it's funny, so you see a guy that was a superstar the day before leaving the building with a plastic bag the next day. They
It's
give
usually
you
how
no
they do
respect.
you. They actually put all your stuff in a trash bag and they hand it to you, and you're like, what about one of those nice monogram bags? Like, no, those are for the guys that play. You get the fuck out of here.
Yeah.
Then they give it to you in
Yep.
a trash bag, and they're
Trash bag.
like
Super Bowl
a stick.
champion.
Yeah, you have like a stick on your shoulder like Charlie Brown, like running away from home.
Yeah.
It's the same deal.
And so at that moment, I had to make a decision because I didn't know if I wanted to do that for a living. In that day, and this isn't even OTAs yet, on that day I made the decision in my head that I was going to do whatever I could to make the players as healthy and as strong and as good as possible, regardless of outcome for myself or them. And I was in the NFL for 1 year because of it.
You know what the NFL stands for, right? Not for long.
Not for long.
Not for long. And no, he got and he also went to a really interesting place in Cleveland. And there's certain places that you don't want to go in the NFL because they will literally, they're like the island of lost toys. You guys know, remember, Rudolph, how they get rid of the island of lost toys. Cincinnati, Cleveland's the worst.
Yeah,
And you go there and it's like guys never come back. They just get stolen like in the night. And, when he told me, he's like, oh, I was in Cleveland for 1 year. I'm like, I know a lot of people that went to Cleveland for 1 year. No, it's, and he's telling me, like, he actually got to work with Ted Washington, who you guys have heard the story, almost blew my back out at 450 pounds, and he only said he was 300 in the program.
Yeah. Well, they stopped weighing him. And the thing that really blew my mind is...
Well, yeah, you know why? Because he threatened them because they were going to fine him. He said, you weigh me, I'm going to kill you. They're like,
Yeah.
okay, we're not going to weigh you.
So every pound that our athletes were overweight, they got a $3,600 fine. And he was just like,
Well,
we're done.
The NFL collectively bargained that it was $330 is what the fine was, but then other teams would throw these exorbitant fees out.
Yeah, they were monsters. And so Ted never measured. But, it's funny, what it did give me a reality check for was the type of human performance that exists at that level. Because we had some good guys.
Yeah.
With Jamal Lewis, we had these other guys that were on the team that year. Two things that stuck out about that year that I will never unsee as a strength athlete. One, Ted Washington. Ted Washington went through one pair of cleats a game. He was such a big, powerful man that he would rip his shoes in half while he was playing football. He would just rip the bottoms right off, and they would have to get
Right
rid
out
of
the sides.
blow out the sides.
And he also had a size 18 foot. Like I remember when he came on, they looked like mini skis.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking to myself, I don't want him to step on me.
Yeah.
And,
He was a monster. And the other thing was Jamal Lewis ran with so much force, and he had a fused ankle by that time in his career. He ran with so much force that he ended up tearing the plantar fascia on his foot because what happened is as he was driving that season, he was snapping his running back cleats in half mid-foot, like he would just break the shoes in half. So he ended up wearing a running back shoe that had a titanium reinforcement along the plantar fascia plate because he would break his Reeboks in half. And that's when I was just like, these guys are operating on a level that is really hard to verbalize. And so even though I was only in the NFL for like the blink of an eye, absolutely changed my perspective on what human performance could be in terms of the type of people that you're going to meet in this life.
Well, it's the ultimate playground for genetic freaks.
Ultimate.
Like people are like, oh, do you think I could build into it? I'm like, I think it happens at birth.
Yep.
You'd see people come in. I mean, he's a genetic freak. I mean, to have a guy, especially a white dude, that big that has a 42-inch vertical. I mean, like the 400-pound squat's amazing, but as a a big dude to be able to jump over 40 inches is almost next to unheard of. I think at the combine I bird 33 at like 312 pounds. So to be able to vert 40, I mean, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it was my equalizer, and we always used to joke that people always had that one magic trick at the highest level. There's always something, grip strength, vertical jump, some sort of thing, and mine was vertical jump. I could always jump, and I could jump from a very young age, and that's a direct handoff from my old man.
Yeah, I mean, that's neurological. You
Yeah,
teach that.
yeah.
I mean, I remember talking to, Angel Spazoff for, I think it was Dr. Romanoff talking about them, like testing kids in Eastern Bloc, and the one thing they would test is vertical jump, and the kids that had good verticals would go this way, and the other ones would get a broom and go that way.
100%. And I think, depending, like going back to your question, if I had been born in Vancouver, Calgary, Toronto, a place like that, I think all that could have come of that is possibly an identification to a different sport. Like, because I really did like team sports. I really liked the camaraderie of working with other people. I love fucking team sports. We just didn't really have enough of them. So I had to find my own way if nobody else was going to go with me. So I probably would have gone a little more hockey. I probably would have gone a different direction. But I'm thankful that track and field found me, and I found track and field when I did, because when I say it opened up the door to the universe for me, it truly has. I've Forrest Gumped my way through the last 20 years of my life like people cannot imagine.
I think everybody has.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, but and those of you guys in here that are parents and have kids, like, I got kids, and it's, you always think, like, if you can, Bert and I talked extensively about it, like, create the environment that you want. Almost sit back a little bit and think about, like, what's the environment. If you wanted to create a pretty hardy, strong individual, somewhere in the Rockies in Vancouver, or British Columbia is one place you'd probably take somebody, just for like the mere fact that there's a physicality in that.
There is. Because with that isolation, I'm a big believer in boredom, right? Like, and people are like, it's crazy, why'd you want to be bored? Because some of the greatest creativity comes from a bored mind. So I'm a big believer in personal boredom. I take opportunity every week to forcibly bore myself into a situation. Sometimes it's driving without a radio, without any interaction, because that boredom turns my mind on. So people, for example, will be like, how did you write 100,000 words of microblogs on Instagram? Like, how'd you do that? That's ridiculous. And I'm like, it's boredom and creativity. Creativity spawned from the boredom. The boredom was spawned from driving through the deserts of Saudi Arabia 40 minutes one way every day. And the same thing holds true when I think of athletic performance. If you don't take people and put them into situations where their brain has to reestablish that problem-solving variable through boredom, they have a hard time being creative. And if you have a hard time being creative, it's really difficult to be successful. Because creativity, in my mind, is not just the ability to paint, draw, sing, or dance. Creativity is the ability to take that manifestation in your mind and start to look for avenues of least resistance where your unique ability has the potential to really outshine maybe other people's in a similar avenue. And if you don't start to establish that boredom pattern, which unlocks that creativity, which heightens your desire, like, listen, boredom for me was the reason why at 14 I lifted weights every day in my basement, right? Because it was a way of, it became a creative outlet for a part of my brain that needed to be constantly stimulated, right? And it would give me that 90-minute release where I was not bored. And then I would go back and have this new enlightenment, and I'd go work on something else. And I think in these real isolated areas, or people that just, I'm not talking about physical isolation of children, I'm talking about the isolation of the mind from the circumstance and external environment that we're in. Okay, so
do you think it's possible to do in today's plugged-in social media, internet, where there's just so much information available? I sometimes wonder if actually it's a detriment to have this much access to information. That I can think of going to the library and actually having to look stuff up, and now it's like you can just like Google everything.
Good. Well, the universe is sitting next to you in that piece of plastic right now. Like, when you think about that, everything that you could possibly think of, bullshit or reality, is going to be on that little device.
Except what's happening here in the moment.
Yes.
What people realize is like, well, I can have everything here. But as you guys know, the experiences that you have here, even if you go watch it later on and you want to connect, and watch a YouTube video of what we're talking about now, you weren't hearing them.
Yeah.
And even though you hear it, you're disconnected. And like, as I'm sitting here, like listening to him talk about it, I get excited.
Yeah.
And like, I'm like waiting for him to throw this table over at me so I can throw it back at him.
Well, and that's exactly it. It's like, and I used to be really self-conscious, like when I would get so impassioned about things that I experienced, good, bad, or otherwise, things that are 10 years, 15 years old, that I would get so impassioned that I'd feel this emotional crack in my voice. And when I used to have that happen, it would make me extremely uncomfortable. And the reality is now, especially at 41 years of age, when that voice cracks, when I'm telling a story that draws upon an emotion, that unlocks that part of myself, what you're experiencing in that moment is a time machine to that moment that affected me in such a way, and you cannot transcribe that through digital. You cannot transcribe that through television. That is a human interaction in the moment, and it's tangible. When somebody is on that moment where their brain is resonating and they're really performing well or expressing well or singing well, or you're watching, if you were to watch someone unleash their voice for the first time live musically, and it makes you almost want to tear up, that's not anything more than that human interaction where for that moment, on a subconscious level, you're absolutely connected to everyone else in that space, and they're connected to you, and you're getting to experience it. And the further we get away from that, the less likely that type of success will continue in the future, because it'll all start to mute itself, because that human interaction is starting to dissipate. That's what I believe. And it could be a little bit out there, but I believe that if you don't reconnect with your athletes, with each other, with your coaches, with individuals face to face, and you hear the crack in the voice when something has emotional meaning, when you lose that, you lose everything.
Well, I mean, it's just like we're having here. We get people emails. Was it going to be online? You're like, no, show up. Be present. Like, be part of the experience. Say you were there, and it's like you think about. As much, much like probably many people in here, like music fans, and I always love listening to like the live recordings of things, and you always think like, what would it have been like to have been there?
Yeah.
Or to like hear the stories he's talking about, throwing in this, and you kind of, as an individual, like I can imagine myself there, and you hear it, and you get excited for him, but it's still not as impassioned as being there or being in the moment.
That unique situation. It's I'm a big believer in groupthink. I'm a big believer in group energy. If you put the right people together with the right motives and the right combination of things, like this room, this organization, what we're doing right now, it doesn't have to inspire 100% of the people, but the people that does inspire, they have to be inspired 100%. And that's what I've always thought about when I write something. And I'll finish you up with a very short story. And this will sum up how I look at a lot of stuff. Okay, so when I started doing Instagram microblogs, they're not really about training for those that have read them. They're life. They're just things that pop into my head. And so there was this guy in the UK. Weird Real.
Okay,
so,
cool, because usually real is weirder than famous.
Yeah, this is weird. So this guy calls me up and he's like, hey man, your blog, it meant a lot to us today, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh, that's cool, and I just like sort of blew it off, and I didn't think much of it. Writes me again, and he's like, hey, we're all big weightlifters over here in Liverpool, yada, yada, yada. One of our 4 best friends has cancer, he's dying. Catches my attention. And I'm like, I didn't know if I should keep writing because it was getting really personal. And it's so crazy because it's not a sad story for me, but it's just being expressive live is hard for me sometimes. So when they wrote me back, they said, whatever you do, don't stop writing these microblogs because they resonate to this group of us, and we don't really have anyone else that resonates with us. And I'm like, well, how's your friend with cancer doing? And he's like, well, he passed. And I'm like, well, I'm really sorry to hear that. And he's like, no, you don't understand. Your blog was the last thing that we read to him. And it was the last time he smiled. And then 100,000 words later, I'm like, I can't stop writing. That's it.